We're back, and it's COMP305, week 4, lesson 4, part 4. We just finished talking about assignment number 2, the 2D platformer that's due October 23rd, right? So see part 3 for you guys if you guys want to check that out. All right, so let's get to the good parts. That was the boring stuff. The good parts is this: we've got our game at this level right now. So if I play it, right? I've got my game, and what it does is I use my keys to move it around, right? And I get some collisions, but I need to create some kind of scoring system right now because that's one piece that's missing. So let's talk about this a little bit. There's some approaches you can take. One thing that I want to do is I want to create a separate game object to handle my scoring, right? Not to actually handle the scripting necessarily, although I could, but to actually contain kind of group together my my text objects, the UI objects that I want to add to the screen. So let's do this. The first thing you want to do is kind of right-click here in the hierarchy and create an empty object. Again, empty objects can be used for a bunch of stuff. I used it for my game controller earlier, right? I can also use it for other things, like, for example, my scoreboard. So let's just call this scoreboard. And again, it's just an empty object. Let's reset it so that it's at the center of my world, right, at 0, 0, 0. That's important to do. And what I want to do here is I want to add some text objects from UI. Now, there's a couple ways you might think about doing it, because I'm saying a component, right? You could think about doing it like this, adding a component. But that means that I would add it into my scoreboard itself, right? And I may not want to do that. I don't want my scoreboard to turn into an object. I want it to be a way I can group other objects together. I want you to think about this. So I could add other ones. But if I wanted to add a component, let's say I was going to make one from scratch, like a scoring, some kind of score or whatever, I could go add component, and I can go to UI, and then I can create something like a text component or something else. And you might see like there's a bunch of stuff we're going to explore in the next unit that we're going to talk about, which is the platformer. I'm going to explore a UI. How do I put together a UI, buttons and events and all that kind of stuff? We're going to explore that piece as well. That's another piece that's not part of your platformer tutorial that I'm going to add in as extra, right? So you can add that into your game. And by the way, I'm going to pay for it because I'm going to give you bonus if you add a beginning, middle, and end, right, for your game, which I haven't really asked for so far. So you can do it this way, but that would be wrong because what's happening is you're going to add it to your scoreboard, and that's not what we want. So what I want to do is I want to right-click here in the hierarchy again, away from the scoreboard, make sure the scoreboard is not clicked, and right-click and go create a UI object. See where it says UI, text. Now hit this, look what happens when I do this. Click. Three things get added to the unit here. Canvas, the text object, and something called an event system, right? I don't want to touch my event system. I'll leave that alone outside of my scoreboard. But what I want to do, and this is important, if I look at my canvas object, I get some weird coordinate space, like 120 by 240, that's the X and Y position, and all this kind of stuff. Leave it the way it is. Who cares about where this is? And look, my text object physically appears on my screen. That's what should happen to you as well if you did what I just did, right? But I got some issues here, right? We'll talk about this in a second. So now what I want to do is I want to rename this object, and I want to call this thing score, right? That's kind of the thing I want to do. I also want to pull my canvas, the whole canvas element here, right? This object, as well as the child object, the score. Listen to what I'm saying. Child object, right? Pull it into my scoreboard and make that the child of the scoreboard. So now I'm grouping it. Look at the hierarchy. So score is the child of canvas. Canvas is the child of scoreboard, right? Don't worry about this for now. Okay, so my scoreboard, 0, 0, 0. My canvas, unfortunately, some weird number. And my text is in the middle of nowhere. Let's make my text look different. So let's change my text color because I want to match it up with what I did before. So I'm going to click onto it, my color area, right? And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can certainly choose a color like yellow and then make it yellow. Or I can actually dial in a number here in RGB. Or in my case, I'm going to use the Hex Color System to match up what it would normally do, right, on the web. And how come there's normally 3 couplets, right? You have like FF, FF, FF. What's the fourth one for? Right? You have a fourth one here. You have 4 couplets, right? So you have 8 positions, if you will, for hexadecimal, as opposed to 6 of them that you normally see. What are the other 2 for? Anybody have an idea? So you have R, G, B, and then one more. Come on, guys, wake up. It's only you know, we're still at 10:52. You guys should have had your coffee and your smokes and everything else you guys going on, right? It's the alpha channel, right? So you can control the alpha channel with the last digits, and you can also do it right here. If you notice, this is the pattern, R, G, B, and A standing for alpha, the transparency that you can see. You can make your text semi-transparent, fully transparent if you want. You can make it fade in. You can do all kinds of special effects you know, that you want. For now, let's leave it at 255 or FF, but change everything else. I want to say FF, FF, 00, FF. Oh, that's what I'm going to use for my color, which makes it a nice glowing yellow. Nice and ugly. That's one thing I want to do. Okay, cool. So I'm going to click away. So that's my preset there for that one. Okay. The other thing that I want to notice is there's a material. I can actually assign a material, so I can add texture if I want to this text if I need to. I really don't need to at this point at all. I can choose a different font. Like right now, my font is Arial. And if I click onto this, I can add in other fonts. And I remember I have another font here, like Doc 51. We're going to get to that later on today. I'm not going to use Doc 51. I'm going to leave it at Arial for a second. My line spacing is 1. My font size is 14, which is quite small. I don't think that's appropriate. Let's make that 40, right? And now it disappears. How come? Right? Because it's too big. So if you look at the width and the height, right, as an example, if you look at the width and the height, you want to kind of make this something like 200 for width and maybe a height of at least 50. Let's make it 50 so it kind of comes up. Now that's a little better, right? Okay, let's do this. Let's change our text to score. Let's set score now, right? So it appears. Okay, and it looks like it's working there. Here's my score. Let's look at my scene for a second. Whoa, what's going on here? My score's way out here. How come it's here on my scene, but on my game it looks like it's down here, right? And how do I move it proportionally onto my screen? This is like it's offset. What's going on here? What would I do? Any recommendations? Remember, my canvas is way out here, right? That's a problem. So let's click on my canvas. This is the first thing, set up my stuff here. And if you notice on the right-hand side, look what it's saying here. My render mode is screen space overlay. That's not really cool. I want to make it first pixel perfect. That's number 1 that I want to change to. Click this pixel perfect. And I want to change from screen space overlay to screen space camera. That's important. But there's no camera assigned to it, so what do we do? Drag and drop, right? Here's my main camera. Whoop, whoop. Now what's it going to do is it's going to align my camera right on top of things. Look at there. Now but my text has disappeared. Okay, hold on. The other thing is my plane distance is 100, right? That's fine, right? I'm still pixel perfect. What about scale factor? My reference pixels per unit is 100. Is that right? No, it's 1 for 1, right? Because that's what I'm doing right now. So 1 to 1. That's another thing I got to change here in my canvas. So my canvas controls where everything is. And look at the position now. My canvas is actually 0, 0, and 90. Who cares? Of the Z. Doesn't make any sense to me, but who cares? I don't care about what my Z position is, but this is cool. My 0, 0 position is good, right? Okay, next. My order in layer. Should that be 0? 1 is the same as the ocean, right? 2 is the plane or the island. 3 is the plane. 4 is the cloud. So it should be something greater than 4. Let's make it 10 just to be safe, right? There we go. Now it appears, right? That's my order in layer. Let's go back. So order in layer. So now there's my score, right? So if I look at my score element and I click F, right, to zoom in, I can actually zoom in on my score, and now I have more of a controllable element here. Let me pull out a little bit, okay, so you can see. Here's the other thing. You see the focal point here? Look, take a look. I'm going to zoom in here. You see that there's a focal point right here? It's hard to see on the screen, but there's actually a little focal point that's in the middle of your object here, right? That tells you the center point. We'll take a look over here. Instead of a regular transform object for UI text, right? You have something called a rect transform. Luckily, it's 0, 0, 0. It's in the middle of our screen. We don't want that. What we want is, because this isn't kind of centering text, I want to put it up here. A lot of times what we want is our text to begin on the top left corner so we can control it more accurately, right? So let's change that. So click here and align it so that it's here, right? And now if you notice, our text becomes the actual center of the screen at 320 and minus 240. See? That's our actual text, where it actually is right now. right? If you click away, now if I want to control it, I can use my little handlebars here, the W key, right, to pull my text where I want it approximately on the screen, right? Because I can realign where I like my text to appear. And it's going to be an overlay, right? Using the camera, I can overlay my scene the way I like it. And I think that's not a bad position. Maybe I can move it a little bit differently. And by the way, I'm just using my eye here. I want to look at what I'm putting it here just as an alignment, from an alignment perspective. I see that I'm at position 120 and Y position of minus 43, right? Let's use another Y position, make it more even. So let's say minus 50, just to make it even, right? An even number. And instead of 120.1, let's make it at 120. And if you're following what I'm doing, you should see something like this. Okay, so that's one. So I got my score. I want to use this same element to do, all again. Should I create another element and do all this stuff again? Or is there a way I can copy this? Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to copy and then paste, right? Now I've got another score element. I'm going to make sure that it's, layered within this one. They're both called score, right? Score and score. I can have more than one score element, by the way. But I want to rename one, and they're all layered on top of each other, right? That's a bad thing. So let's make the second one lives. I'm going to kind of click once and rename it to lives. And for this score element, or this text element, I'm going to change this from score to lives. There we go. Now, if they looks like they're on top of each other. That's okay, because we're going to move it with the handle, right? Our gizmo here. We're going to move it to the right so that it gives us a little bit for lives. Now, I don't know if score should be here or lives. I think maybe I'd probably reverse them. So let's put them the other way around. So maybe I'll put this one back, click on score, move my score over, because I probably want to see my score to the right and my lives on the left. Oh, look, my lives has a semicolon instead of a colon. Let's fix that. Okay, there it is. Right, so click away, and I see my score and my lives, and I give my a little bit of space for my score and my lives. You guys good? Are you with me? All right, so I'm going to file, save scene, file, save my project, and just so we can keep on the same track, I'm going to upload this to GitHub so you guys have this as well. So I'm going to go to desktop, and by the way, I can't tell you how important GitHub is. We're going to use it later on more. I'm going to ask you guys to do more with GitHub. I've asked you to kind of put stuff up on GitHub for your assignments, yeah? So it's going to be the same thing. You have to know how to do this kind of stuff. So let's go into my project, so Unity projects, and I want to go into COMP305. If I can type COMP305, and I want to go into MailPilot, but the first demo for you guys, not for section 1, right? So then I want to kind of, here's my COMP305. I want to git add dot, because I know it's already a Git repository. And I want to git commit -m for message. Here's my message, which is going to be added UI text. Right? Now I'm going to git push origin master, which is going to send my changes up on GitHub. And again, for those people who are watching, or if you're following along, my GitHub /Centennial College, right, will have your MailPilot demo right here. This is the one we're working with. And you can see that it's done 11 seconds ago. Hey, let's add a README file, right, because we don't have a README file here. What is that? This is Markdown. Right? It's not markup. And it tells me what the GitHub repository is all about. So this repo is for the MailPilot demo 2D shooter project for COMP305 game programming 1, and we're at Centennial College to say. All right, so I've added that in, and I want to accept the basic commit that I'm going to get from online, and click commit new file. When I do that, if you notice, I've got a bit of an introduction as to what this thing is about. But now I'm a commit behind, because I've done a commit online. Here locally, I don't have this README file. Let's pull it back. So I'm just going to go git pull, right? And if I do that, it pulls my README file. And now if I do a ls command or a directory command from if you're on the Windows machine, you can see that I have a README MD file right here. I've pulled it down. And sometimes when you collaborate with team members, you want to do a pull first so that way you get their changes and then do your changes and then push up. So that's a good workflow for as a basic workflow to work with somebody else. Okay, of course you can also use the tool, the GitHub client. Okay, so we've got everything on GitHub, so you can follow along here. And again, it would be on github.com, Centennial College, COMP305, Mail Pilot Demo. And if you look there, then you'll see the GitHub files. If you notice, I've got 12 commits already, right? So, hey, look, I've been doing it with you, and I've got 12 commits. So you should have, this is a good example of how many commits. People ask, how many times should you commit and push, Tom? And my answer to you is, every time you make a major change, that's a good point, right? Also, when you stop for the day, that's a good point. Go to the washroom, commit and push, right? Have a smoke, commit and push. Eat, commit and push. Do other nasty things, commit and push, right? It's all around that. Why? So you can save your location. You can always go back. You can always compare what you got to something else, right? So you can say, I broke my build. I don't want you ever to say that, right? If you say I broke my build, you should be able to go, okay, I broke my build. I'm going to go back to my previous version and see what I did differently. What did I change from version, the previous commit to this commit? And if I look at my commits, you can see that each one of them has a bit of a change. I finalized my change to my Cloud Collider. I updated my player controller script. I did all these things, and I keep annotating this is all the kind of stuff that I want to see as a screenshot at the very minimum in your documentation, right? Show me the screenshot in your external document, or you know what? Give me the link to your commits so I can actually look to it and see how many commits you got. In fact, if anything, your documentation should tell me where your GitHub repository is, just in case you haven't given me that in your submission, okay, for your assignment number 1. Okay, let's go back. So again, GitHub, again, version control, super important. And you know what? There's a whole workflow that we use in Unity when we do a cloud build. We're going to talk about that later on, and how to deploy from GitHub to the cloud build so you can actually see your work online. And Unity servers will build it for you as opposed to you building it locally. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So there's a whole reason why we're doing GitHub. It's not just for me, right? Because I'm asking you to do it and being a pain in the ass. I'm not trying to do that for you. I'm trying to get you guys to go into the workflow of how we really do it. Okay, let's get back. So that's one thing. So we've made our changes. This is nice. How do I access this stuff now, right? I mean, I have my score and my lives, but I really haven't tagged anything. And this is really important to do sometimes. I want to be able to, just in case I need it, I probably won't use it for this particular project, right? But I want to build out my tags a little bit. So I'm going to kind of click in there and add tag. Let's go in there. I've got a couple tags now. I've got ocean, island, and cloud. Let's add another one. And I'm going to put in a new one called score, right? And add another one called lives, because those are my tags, right? Remember, these are all objects, right? These are objects. So what I want to do is when I want to connect to these objects, there's got to be ways of doing it. I want to start this on a good foot, if you will, by doing it this way. Now, if I click away, I've got these nice little things added in. But if I go back to score, it's still untagged. Remember, you have to tag it manually by clicking on score. Lives, you want to click on lives, so we can tag it, so we can always track it if I need to, right? It's got a tag of its own, right? So if I want to, get object by tag name, I can do that as opposed to making a reference to it directly. But we're going to make a reference to it directly because it's a little easier. So let's talk about this. So I need something, right, to control my score and my lives. And what better place than to put it in my collider, right? So if you notice, if I go to my my player, and if I just expand my collider script only, if you notice, all it has is player collider, and there's nothing else. There's nothing exposed in the inspector. Let's expose, so to speak, some stuff in the inspector. And how would we do that kind of thing? What would be how would we make it so that the collider itself, the collider script, right, allows us to connect everything we need here, right? How would we do that? So the first thing is we have to think about what our objects are. These are game objects, but they're also text objects, right? If I was to pull this in as a game object into my collider script, let's try that first. So I'm going to go in my collider. You might be forgiven to think that that's okay to do, right? Because again, you're just learning stuff, right? We're all learning together, and I want to add in some kind of public access to my to my script. I want to make a reference to my text object so I can affect them. So when I have a score change, I want to affect the score directly, right? How do I do that? Well, I've got to make a reference to them. So I might be forgiven. You might be forgiven the thing to do it like this. This is wrong. So just watch for a second. Don't do it. Public instance variables, right? And in here, I want to call them public, and I say game object as an example, and then I call one. We'll call it score label. We'll make another one public game object, and we want to do it. We want to call this one lives label, just to keep up with the same thing. And they're public, and that's cool. And I made them capitalized. Let's keep with the convention and make them lowercase like this, just cause, right? I'm okay. I'll be all right, Tom. That's my sickness, right? I can blame my sickness on this week, right? So I'll save it, right? And if I go back to Unity, so don't do this, right? Because I'm going to change it in a second. But if I go back to Unity, and if I click on my player object, right, then I see that there is a score label and a lives label, and it's listening for a game object. Remember what we do in a scenario, what we want to try and do is we want to drag and drop, right, the score, the object onto this path or this place inside of our script to make a connection, a reference, so I can access the object directly. So let's do that. So this is wrong. Okay, so I'm going to make a score. Here's my score object and my score label. And if you notice the little symbol there, see how it looks like a little cube? It's hard to see, but if you try it, there's a little cube right there. Unity gives you a look to see what it is. I do lives. It's an object, right? Here we are. So this works, right? And you might say, okay, I can access my object now, right? I can even access it by tag name, right? Mm-hmm. Let's save everything, go back to my script, and let's see if I can do this. So I've got my score label and my lives label. They're game objects. Cool, 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 right? So in my start, I want to initialize them. So I start by typing this dot score label, and then I say, so how do I access my text? Because my text must have a component. Let's look in the actual object. Here's my rect transform. Here's my canvas renderer. Here's my text. Okay, I need to get to my text component, right? Let's try that out. Because I mean, that's the only way I can access my text component, yeah? So let's try getting that. So we'll say score label, and we'll open up a dot get component, right? That's what you normally would do for an object, right? If I can type properly. And then we use these angle brackets to put in, text, right? And then I'm in trouble because I notice that when I do this, there is no text. It glows red, right? And I can't get a reference to it because it's a generic game object. Sure, my text is a generic game object, but Unity doesn't know that this is also a text object. It's a subclass, okay, going back to C#, a subclass of the game object superclass, right? So yes, it would accept this because it is a game object, right? It has an is a relationship with game object, but it's not the right one we add in. If I try and make this a text object, so I'm going to say, let's make it a text object. We might be forgiven to think this is okay. A text object, right? And this is wrong, by the way, so we're just going to take this out, right? If you make the text object, it's glowing red. How come? You need to include another library in here. So this is the answer, right? So you go in here and you say this. You go using Unity engine, right, .ui. And once you do that, those go from red to blue. That's good. Now they're text objects, which are still game objects, but they're a subset, right, of the game object, right? So they're not exactly. It's a game object plus things have been overwritten because they have remember, a game object has a slightly different component. It has a transform. We have a rect transform, so it's been overwritten, right? So there's some slight differences here. Now we can actually access these objects. Okay, but now when we do that, if I go back, if I save my script and I go back to here, and if I look, I've lost my references. If I go back to player, I don't have any references again to my my score label and my lives label. I've got to do that drag and drop one more time. So I'm going to do score label. Notice how the symbol has changed to U, which means the UI component. That's good. That's a good positive sign. I drag and drop and I see score label and my lives label are now, there's a reference to them that I've got here. This is good. Okay. By the way, if I just run the game just like this, right, you notice that two things happen. My score label, my live label are in next positions, right? That's how it should be. So I've tested them out, so I know it's running in my game. You should be able to have that right now. Okay, that's number one. Two, going back to my script. So I've got I've referenced to my score label and my live label. Now I want to set them up. And how do I set them up? I want to set them up first when I come in and I initialize my player object. As soon as I instantiate my player object, I want to set up my score. What would my score start off with? I need values, and I can't put them in my live label and score label because those are text objects. I have to have some private values that I kind of hold my score. Now, you might say, hey, Tom, you can put this in. You can put this in the scoreboard instead of here inside the player collider. You're right, I could. But I'm going to make a collision, and I want to access the scoreboard anyway, right? So there's different approaches here. I'm going to do it this way for this game. Next time we do it, we might do it a different way, right? It all works the same at the end. And we haven't talked about really optimizing scripts, which we'll probably do at some point in the future. I don't know why this is bumping up. We'll just close it down. All right, so let's make a private instance variable then, or a couple of them, right? We're going to say private instance variable, and we're going to call one of them, right, our score value. Maybe we have to use the underscore as a convention, score value, right? That's one. And we're going to initialize it here in the, when we declare it, as my score value should start off at 0, yeah? But we also need to declare what kind it is. My score should be an integer, right? So private integer score value, and we initialize it to 0. Same thing with our lives value. So int, we're going to call this a lives value, right? We're going to initialize this to 5. We're going to give ourselves 5 lives, right? Hey, hold on, right? Score value, lives value. I'm hard coding it here, and the question is, should I hard code it? Chances are not. And the other thing is, if I don't want to hard code this, right, then it means I should probably make them public variables, right? So let's move these up before I use them. So I'm going to just copy these things because I'm thinking as I'm doing it, right? So I'm going to make this, instead of private, I'm going to make them public so they're exposed. There's different ways, by the way, to expose them or hide them. Talk about that later. And you'll learn that in the new video. And take away the underscore because that's not our convention for public variables, right? And we'll set them up with default values, right, here for the first time. And you'll see how this will appear as the default values online. Let's take a look and see how it looks like in the inspector now. So I go click away from the player and click back. And when I go back here, I see that I got a score of value of 0 and a 5 as a default. So there's nothing wrong with defaulting your values, but you can also switch them around if you want to try something else, right? Especially if you're testing how do I go from level 1 to level 2 and you're listening for 1,000 points. Maybe you don't want to go through that demo with somebody, or you want to test out, okay, I got 1,000 points, take me to level 2, and you want to see the transition. You want to do it here instead of going through the whole game and playing it sometimes, right? So there's a quick and dirty way of doing it as opposed to doing it in your script and going back and changing it over and over again, right? More control again, right? Okay, cool. So my lives label, my score label, we've got this, and I want to assign this to my text when I start off. How do I do that? So go back to my code, right? And now I can do this. I can set my score value, my lives value here when I start off. But you know what? Chances are I'm going to set it up here too and here in my my game object, right? So if I'm going to do it twice, I now got to think about code reuse, right? This harkens the need for another method, right? So I might as well, right, because this is a public method, I might as well create a private method, right, that's only available to inside my game where I can update my score, right? So maybe I want to call it update score, right? And I'm going to put this here, right, and here, or set score, whatever you want to call it. Maybe that's a better way of saying it, like a setter, right? But the setter is going to be private in this particular case. Let's do that. So I'm going to say, go down here and make it so it's private, private method. Here's my private method. It's going to be private. It's going to return void, right? Because it's not going to return anything. And I'm going to bring this up a little bit so you can see it more. Private void. I'm going to need my name for the method, just like normal C#, right? And we're going to call this, set score, right? Now I'm going to use capital S for set because that's our thing, and we use the underscore because it's private. So set score, right? and we're going to make it the empty constructor here for the empty method header, right? That's the signature we're going to use for this one. And my set score is actually going to do it down here. So we're going to say this dot underscore sets, it's going to be the value, right? Sorry, not underscore, the score value. This is my value itself. Here's my score value, right? I want to set it to something, right? But I don't want to set the value because I have my value updated. What I want to do is I want to set my score label, right? So my score label then, but I can't update the label itself, right? Because the label itself is of type text. If I hover over it, it tells you, right? I want to access this thing, right? If I go dot text, right? And I say equals to, now I want to set up my string because the text is a string. If I hover over my text object, it says it's going to wait for a string object. Let me just click away and click back. If you hover over it sometimes, it'll tell you what it is, right? And in my case, it's not working right now. But if I do that, if I set up a string object, I want it to look like this. I'm going to retype my score like this. Watch, score. That's how it would look, plus anything else I want to add into it. And what is it going to look like? It's going to be like this. Plus, I'm going to concatenate my integer, right? Just like I would normally do. I'm smashing my integer and turning it into a string by using the plus operator, right? And my integer value would be this dot score value, right? So I'm adding my score value in there. Now, right, my score value is 0, right? By default. Do the same thing for my other one now. So it's instead of score label, it's going to be lives label, right? Dot text. It's pretty simple. Is equal to lives, right? Plus the value of the lives right now, which starts off at lives value, which is 5. You get 5 lives. So that's the thing that's going to be. We're going to access this over and over again, right? So let's save that. And I want to use this private method to access my public values. This is kind of weird. But let's go back over here and say, so when I start the game, I want it to show. So let's try this out. So I'm going to say this dot underscore set score. And that's going to be our private method that's not accessible from outside of our class. Right, so set score. So that's going to fire off. Let's just check this one first. All right, so we'll put it there. And let's see how that works. So I'm going to kind of save everything, save my scene, and press play. And if I've got any errors, by the way, it'll come up my console, which doesn't. I'll press play and let's see what happens. I got 5 and 0. This is good. This is a good step. Let's stop this. And let's go back to my code. So that's the first thing is like, this is how you set the score. And I'm using the text property of my text UI object, right, to adjust my score. This is how we're going to do it, right? Okay, now I know that if I collide with my island, right, I want to gain points. Right? So I'm going to change the score now. So I'm going to say, therefore, when I collide with my island, this is the first thing I want to do. I want to say this dot score value, right? My value, right? I want to make it plus equal to 100. I'm going to add 100 points to it, right? So I'm changing my score value. Every time I hit an island, I collide with an island, I make the yay sound, and I also give myself 100 points, right? Okay, and then the same thing goes here. I want to do this dot underscore, or sorry, dot lives value. You can see how this is going. That was the wrong one. Lives value, right? Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can say minus equal to 1, or you can go minus minus, right? Both ways work fine. If you're a C++ person or an old C person, then this would make sense to you. All you're doing is decrementing the life value by 1, right? So both work. I'm going to use this way. So we're going to subtract. Remove 1 life, right? And this one, we're going to add, just as an annotation, add 100 points, right? That's what we're doing here, right? Just to show what we're doing. So we're play the noise, play the yay sound, right? Which is what this is doing. Play yay sound, right? This one is play the thunder sound. These are all things that are happening when you have a collision, right? And then remove a life. But we haven't updated our score yet, and this is where we're going to use this method again for the second time. So at the bottom, after we do this, and by the way, we're going to use on trigger enter, right? Every time there's a collision, right? So we're going to check this every time there's a collision, both scenarios, and then we're always going to try and update our score, even if there's nothing that's changed, for 1, right? So we're going to just reprint our score out again. So I'm going to go like this. This dot underscore set score, and we're going to set that up on the bottom. Right? So this is where we're going to do this. These two, we're going to re-energize these two lines of code again. So we're going to use it here at the beginning to set our initial score, and then here afterwards to actually display our score as we're updating. Questions before I try this out and see if this craziness, this insanity that I've talked to you about works, right? Does it make sense to you, first of all, right? It should make sense to you what we're doing. All we're doing is trading values, and we're delivering the value into a text object. Remember that all text UI objects are string values. They do not, just like they would be if you did a C# form, right? Every object that you see on the C# form is a string object from a text value perspective, right? Let's try this out. So I'm going to run it, and then boom, I lose a score. I lost 2 there, right? And let's get my score of 100 points.
Yay.
I got 200 points.
Yay.
300 points. See if I can get. Oh, I'm going to die. If I go to 0, that's a good chance to stop my game, and I would stop my game now, right?
Yay.
And you can do that because I'm recording how often my game is playing, right? So what I can do then is I can destroy all my objects from my screen and kind of write out game over. I had a basic thing. If I go to 0 score, my game is over, and I can display my score in another label that I can create that's only visible when my game is over, right? So I can make them invisible. They've got an opacity of 0, and I can change the opacity to something else later on and to make them visible. That's a trick, and it looks like I'm using multiple scenes, but really it's only one scene. And this is the way you would do it in your game. So, so that's one piece. So I've got my score working pretty much now. So I want to end my game, right? I want to end my game. So what do I do? How do I destroy my objects when I'm done, right? So I've collided with a bunch of stuff, and I want to remove my object. How do I do that, right? Because I want to kind of kill my game or reset my game as an opportunity as well, right? Now, the tutorial shows you how to do this, right? Tutorial online. And I'm going to let you play with that option. But the trick is, and the challenge here is, what my score is right here. On trigger enter, as soon as I come up to this point, as an example, I can test to see if my score is a certain level to go to the next level, to add more challenge or whatever. I can also test to see if my lives value is 0. And as soon as my life value goes to 0, I instead of setting my score, I want to break out of this, right, and destroy my player object. How do I do that? Right? Let's just try this out. Let's just say if my lives go to 0, I want to use the destroy method, right? And I want to kill my my game object, right? So I'll just do like game object. I can also use the keyword this, right? That's a reference to the game object itself. Let's use game object anyway. Let's see what happens. So if my lives go to 0, right? So I got to test that. So I'm going to say if, and this is inside my if statement. If this dot lives value, right, is less than 1, and be careful. Why am I saying less than 1 and not 0? Or less than or equal to 0. I could say also less than or equal to 0. That's another option you can do. That would work too. I want to do that because sometimes my life, if I have multiple collisions, could go less than 0 really quickly, right? But if I hit 2 clouds at once, and then it won't be equal to 0, it'll be -1 right away. And I won't be able to catch it before it updates, right? So if my live's less than or equal to 0, then I want to destroy my game object, this game object here. That's the first thing I want to do. But I also want to get rid of a bunch of other objects, right? I want to get rid of my clouds. I want to get rid of, my score. I want to get rid of all these other things and do other things. For now, let's just say we're going to destroy our game object, right? And we also want to take away our score and all that stuff. But first of all, let's try this. Let's see what problems this causes, if it causes any. Because we're destroying our game object from within our game object, right? This harkens back to why we would want a separate scoreboard that can control our score and our game objects that's separate from our game object itself, so that we don't have any conflicts here. Let's try it. Can we destroy the game object from within itself is what I'm asking. Let's try this out. So I'm playing around, right? And I'm playing with my game. Let's just die, right? So 2, 3, and done, right? So it worked. I can't control anything, but the game continues, right? Why does the game continue? Because you know what? The game is over. I've got my lives is 0, my score is 0, right? And the game is over. So what I want to do is turn this life off, this live 0 off, to show the end of my game, right? And bring this score value, maybe just turn this whole scoreboard off, and show another thing, another piece that maybe I can bring together, like a high score or final score or whatever, as another object, and create some other text labels. But those objects are not enabled in my game until this object kicks off, and I want to disable the other objects or remove them from the game, right? So how do I remove my clouds? Well, I have to access my game controller, right? I've got to send a message to my game controller somehow to let my game controller know that it's over. The game is done, right? I can continue this if I want to, and I can do this. The simple way is let things keep going. My game is over, and that's a simple way of doing it without killing my clouds, right? Because we're not shifting scenes. In the real world, what I would really do is stop this scene altogether and go to a new one. My new one would be my game over scene, where I could have a transition, some other music, other kinds of things that would happen. I don't want to do it all in one scene. It's too much, right? I don't want to disrupt what I've got here. But for now, let's see if I want to destroy my object. If you notice on the hierarchy, it goes away. And what I want to do is redisplay a score, remove these things. Okay, so I want to hide my score label. So okay, let's go back. So how do I access? Remember, my score label has color. So I could certainly do this. I could certainly turn this off, right? And it also has a checkbox, right? This enabled checkbox, right? So if I actually look at this object, right, I want to turn off my score. How do I do that? Let's do that. So I'm going to say this dot score label. Let's try with one of them. Dot, and let's see what other things I have to do. I can do a bunch of these things here. If I scroll down, I have a color. I have access to my color, right? I have crossfade alpha, and here's my enabled, right? Enabled. So if I click enabled, and if you notice, it says I can set it. I can listen for it if it's enabled or not, and I can set it, right? If I want to make it enabled or not. So let's use enabled. I want it enabled is equal to false. Can I do that? Let's try that. So I'll do it for both things. So this score label and this .lives label, right? .enabled is equal to false. Now, for the people who were with me last day, if you're watching this video, there are some things that I didn't talk about because I didn't get around to them last day because there was a bunch of questions and some other things that came up. But this is a really simple way of doing it. Let's check this out. Let's see if this works, first of all. So I'm playing, collide a bunch of times, and then my labels go away, right? There they go, right? So my labels go away. It's the first thing I want. These things keep going. And now I want to show a new label up here. What do I want to do? Enable it in the scene where it's supposed to be, right? Where it's going to show my game over. Game over is what I want to show in the middle of my scene. And I want to add in my final score, right? Your score is whatever my score value is. Nice and easy for my game, right? How do I do that? Let's stop playing. And now I need a couple of other items here, right? Well, guess what? I have my score and I have my lives. I might as well do a copy and paste here. Copy in my canvas. I'm going to paste. Add it into my canvas as an additional score item, right? And change the value of my score item from score, right? I'll call this game over. That's my game over text, right? And we'll change my score item to game over. Game over. We'll make it from 40 to 60, so kind of much bigger, which means, which means my height should be about 70, right? Take a look and see what we're seeing here on the screen, right? My game over text, I'm already saying game over, and I want to put it in the middle of my screen, exactly in the middle of my scene, right? Which means this time, from a rect transform perspective, I want to change this from the top left to the middle, right? And I'm going to modify my position here in my X and Y coordinates, right? So that it's equal. One thing else is my game over is bigger, so I may have to use slightly bigger text, right? So I'm going to go to, let's say, 250. Let's try 250. All right, let's try 300. Hold on. Not quite. Let's try 400. That's pretty good. And what I want to do is you can also align it so that it's centered, the actual text. So if you notice my alignment right now down here, I can make it centered, right? So that's centered. And I can physically go right in the middle of my world by choosing a position of 0, 0, 0, right? So that's an exact center of my world, right? If I wanted to put my game over text in the middle, right? Here's my game over text. So game over, right? And let's bring it a little up because we're not going to make it exactly at 0, 0, 0. We're going to put it, let's say, about there, right? And we want to put my other label down here, right? So this is about 80, which I'm going to call my final score, your score is, right? So here's my game over score. I'm going to copy this one because I've got a lot of the same things here. I've made some changes as opposed to the score and lives label. They're slightly different. So let's make a copy of this one. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it in my canvas, and I'm going to put it underneath my here in my canvas. I'm going to put it in my underneath my game over. We're going to rename this thing, right, to final score, right? Here's my final score. And we're going to change my text to, maybe like score again. That's what our score is going to be, right? I still want to make it 60 size, right? But I want to make it lower, right, down on my screen. So my score, my final score, here it is. Right, so kind of right there, and I think probably that's a good place to make it 0, 0, 0. So there's my in the middle of my screen. That's going to be here, and if you notice, it's going to kind of appear over here, right? So I got to kind of make a decision. Do I want to make this centered, or do I want to put it near the left? What's going to happen if it's centered? Will it center my text? How will it work? You got to think about that for a second, right? So let's leave it as is for now, and we'll check it out. So that's where it is. But right now they're enabled, right, by default. So both of these things are enabled. Game over and final score, and I need references to these things in my player collider, right? So I got to go back to my player collider, right, up here, almost done, guys. And I got my score label of my lives label. Might as well continue, right? I'm going to go public text. We're going to call this one our game over label, game over label, oops, and public text. Again, our final score label, final score. Well, another long, but it's okay, right? So we got references to these things. I don't need any other values because I already have my values here. Just need references to these things. So I'm going to save this, go back out to my inspector, click away and click back, and now I have some other spaces for game over label and final score label, which I'm going to drag and drop. So here's my game over label. Here's my final score label. This is a cheesy way to do it, by the way. There's other ways, right? And once we've got these in place, my game over label and final score label, I've got the ability for me to display them or not. All right, so let's turn them off. There's different ways. I can turn them off here in the inspector by unclicking this checkbox, right? I could do that, but that means it turns everything off. I don't want that. I want to unset them in my start method, right? So in the beginning, they're unset, but when I finalize, I want to hide these ones and show these ones, right, to show that it's the game over, right? Now this would satisfy your requirements for your game, right? Because I'm saying make sure it shows game over in your score, right? So how would I do that? So here in my start, I've set my audio sources and I set my score. That's cool, but I also want to disable my labels. So I can do like this. This dot game over label. Here it is. Game over label dot enabled is equal to false, right? And this dot final score label dot enabled is equal to false. These are the values, the default values that I'm setting in my start method when my player object is initialized, right? When it's instantiated in my scene, right? Okay, cool. So now what I want to do is when down here, when I come in here, I want to re-enable it on destroy. Now look, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in here. This harkens to be a method again, right? Because there's a bunch of stuff I'm doing in this if statement, right? So I could call something like end game, right? Like, which is another method, which is probably what I want to try and do. So let's do that really quickly, just from and we'll make it a private method again. So private void, we'll make it an underscore end game method. right, that we're going to call, okay? And you're going to see why we're going to do this. When I kind of copy this stuff here, copy it out, put it in here, call this dot underscore end game method in here, right? Because if it's less than 0, my game is over, right? So this is part of what I want to do here, right? But the other part is I want to enable my game over, and I want to enable, right, my my final score. So let's do that. So I'm going to say this dot game over label dot enabled is equal to true because it's game over time, right? And now this is where it becomes interesting. This dot final score label dot enabled is equal to true. And now we also want to say this dot final score label dot text, right, is equal to score plus your score. This dot score value underscore score value. Oh, sorry, score value is not an underscore. It's a public variable. Whew. Make sense? Our end game method is when we call this fires. Why am I putting it in a method? Because I might use it again. I might change it again. I might want to call this more than once. And it's also cleaner from a human readability perspective. It labels what this whole thing. It groups all the items that have to go into your game, the final game method together, so that way we know what's going on. Right? There's no doubt of what's happening. Are you good?
Yeah.
Let's try this out and see what happens. So I'm going to save everything, run this thing, and let's see what happens when my game is over. So I'm going to ba-bam, bang, I get the score, so one score, and then in a series of events, my game is over, right? That's what happens. Look, my other labels disappeared, and my score is 200, and it's centered, right? Which is interesting too. It actually centers because I've put in the centering value. It centers my score over here. So, any questions around this score stuff, right? Now, what about if I want to start the game over? How do I do that? I want to give the option here in my player controller or my game controller when my score is 0, right? When my score is 0, I want to be able to, you know, I want to be able to. This is one way of doing it. I want to be able to restart my game. How do I restart my game? And that's I'll leave to you. So, because I can't tell you everything. Otherwise, I've told you how to do your entire project on your own, right? So I'll leave that to you. There's an easy way to do it. I would use the input.get key, and I'm going to use the type of key that I'm using, right? And from there, I'm going to listen for some kind of key to start, like a space bar. And I might give some more instructions here. You know, press space to restart. You know, as an example, that might be another label I can fire off here, right? And then when you press space to restart, it restarts your game, right? So very simple. All right, I want to stop it here. I want to stop the video here. I think this is good for a score and kind of an end game situation, right? I'm also going to, while we're doing that, I'm going to update GitHub. So I'm going to save my scene and save my project. And then when I go to GitHub, this is a good workflow here again. I'm going to say git add dot. So add everything to the stage. I'm going to say git commit -m for message. What's my message? What did I do now? I said I added a scoreboard project. That's what I kind of did. So scoring and final game. And I'm going to say git push origin master. And what it's going to do is going to push everything up to my GitHub. So if I go up on GitHub and refresh, you should see that I added my scoreboard to project and what files have been changed. Right, my solutions changed. Everything else. So you should be able to pull this down, the changes that I have in here. So you can keep track with what I'm doing. Now I've got 13 commits so far, and we're going to have more by the end of the day. All right, so let's pause here, take a 10-minute break, and come back with more.